morning, students. Welcome to the Learner Development and Learning DPPE and DJP for the 2022 examinations. My name is Yuna Kario. I am your tutor for the subject LDL for those of you who are doing DJP and DPP. My contact number, as seen on the screen there, is 08128514224. And you can also contact me on my two given email addresses there. I have a Gmail account and a Yahoo account, so you are free to send in your queries or any other concerns that you might have with regards to LDL on the emails provided there. All right, let's go directly into the subject. The introduction. As you are aware, your module consists of 6 units. Unit 1 talks about the stages of child development before the pre-primary stage. Unit 2 is about the theories that are involved in the developmental domains of children. And then we have Unit 3, which is more on the diseases and the immunization of illness that children might have. It's very important for you as a teacher, as an educator, to be aware of the symptoms that a child might have in your classroom. So you need to take this unit as important. I know sometimes we kind of overlook this unit, but it's very important for you as a teacher to know if a child is in your class is showing symptoms of any illness. For example, maybe the child has polio symptoms or any other disease that they might be having. So you have to understand what are the symptoms that they might be having, or what are the complications of the illness that they might have had earlier in their life. So you need to also know the complications. For example, when we talk of polio, we say that it has complications such as a paralysis that it can cause. It can also cause it can also destroy the nerves that control muscles in a child. So as you are having this child in your class and they might have this complication, it's very important for you that you do understand that an illness like polio could have caused that. And then we come to Unit 4. It's about self-concept issues as part of human development. Self-concept issues, there are a lot of issues here. So you have to know everything that has to do with self-concept, how the children look at themselves as a human being. For example, I'll talk more on self-concept as I move on through the presentation. And then we have Unit 5, which is about the learning aspects and the learning theories that we have in our subject, LDL. And then we have the impact of poverty, the impact of health, and the impact of violence on development and on learning in the classroom. So let me start now. What you might expect, the kind of topics or concepts that you might get in the 2022 examination from Unit 1. I've designed them in such a way that I'll go through each unit and the possible topics that will come from each unit. I'll start off with Unit 1. The key areas in Unit 1 that you should look at. In Unit 1, whenever I set an examination, I always start off with the definition of some concepts like maturation, like what is development, what is learning, what is a learning theory. I'm not going to highlight which ones I've put in the examinations, but I'm just giving an example that you might expect questions like for you to define a concept like maturation, like I mentioned, or what is learning, or what is a learning theory. So you need to be able to define this concept. And then we come on to the understanding of the physical, the cognitive, and the emotional development features of children. With the physical features, we will have to talk about, for example, I can give an example like when a child is growing from the prenatal stage to the time that they are born, to the time that they start walking, to the time they start speaking. All these are the physical features that a child will go through their development. And then we come to the cognitive concepts. You should also understand what are the cognitive processes that a child goes through in their lives from the time that they are born to the time that they are maturing. And then we've got the emotional development. I think I'll touch a bit on what is expected, because I always find that most students struggle with defining emotional development. I think it's very easy for most of the students to define the physical features of development in children, because these are things that you can actually see that a child is now able to walk, a child is able to sit up. They start with sitting up, with crawling, and then they start now with standing on their own, and then they're walking, and then they're running. That is a physical aspect. The cognitive, of course, we know it has to do with the brain development, how a child is now able to understand, they can now conceptualize topics or issues. Their level of thinking has matured from the time that they were 2 years old, the time that they are 7 years old. You can see a difference in their cognitive skills. Okay, so what are the emotional development features of children? So the emotional features is the process of learning how to understand and control emotions. Just as in adults, children also need to understand how they can control their emotions, how they should also understand how their emotions can actually help them in learning. For example, we can say when they are happy, they need to understand how is it affecting their learning in the process. If they are upset or if they are angry, so it's all these are all part of emotional, and the kid is not to understand there are different emotions that they might experience as they are growing up. All right, and then the physical development in antenatal stage features. You find this, of course, in Unit 1 of your module, of your study guide. It gives you more elaborate discussions on what happens from all the stages that the children go through. Like this is just I'm just kind of repeating what I've just mentioned in the second point there, the cognitive development features, and of course the social emotional development features. Now this has to do also with how they are, the society in which they are growing up, and the emotional things that they might be going through as interrelated to the environment in which they are growing up. For the 2022 examination, basically this is what you should expect from Unit 1. Let's go on to Unit 2. In Unit 2, you have to understand the psychological theories related to child development. In this unit, that's where you find a lot of theories. So you need to understand. I'm not going to specifically give you which theories I'll ask on the psychological theories, because that will be spoon feeding. Because the important thing is not for us just to mention one theory and then you just go and memorize that theory. You need to understand all the theories, because as a teacher, you need to understand all the different theories, because we don't just concentrate on one theory. All the theories are important as we learn them in our studies, in our educational psychology studies. We do understand that there's no theory which is mightier than another theory. All theories are important in us understanding the whole child, all children in general. But I would also highlight that it's important that you understand the Ericsson theory of human development. You know, Ericsson is the one that talks about the attachment theory. And of course, you know, in your study guides, even if in your assignment, you might have come across the issues of attachment. So Ericsson's attachment theory is actually based on the idea that human beings human beings need to form emotional bond and attachment to their caregivers or to their parents, and he calls this bond an attachment. Of course, this attachment, he further on explains that it can be secure attachment or it can be insecure attachment. When he talks about insecure attachment, he actually says that this is actually a child who has not securely bonded with their parent or with their significant caregiver. And as a result of this lack of bond, the child becomes an anxious person. It becomes very anxious when the caregiver leaves, and the child can also become extremely angry when the caregiver or the parents are not present. But he says, on the other hand, secure attachment actually is the opposite of insecure attachment, whereby a child has securely bonded with their parent or with their significant caregiver. So he mentions, or he highlights, that it's very important for a child to grow up in a secure environment whereby there's been a lot of time given for that child to securely bond or to be attached to their parents. Or it doesn't have to be a parent, because not all children are raised with their parents. It can even be a caretaker or a caregiver, or the person that stays with the child when the parents are at work. All those are important people to bond with. So Ericsson gives us the understanding that attachment is very important for human development. We need this attachment from an early stage on in life for us to be able to have trust with other human beings as we are growing from a very infant stage to all throughout your adulthood, throughout your life. It's very important that this bond is secured at the beginning, because it will determine how a child deals with their emotions and how they are able to interact and to bond with other people in future. We might have some questions on the behaviorist theories of classical and operant conditioning. Normally, sometimes you might find a question paper where they are just asking you on the classical conditioning theory. Sometimes they might ask you only on the operant conditioning theory, or sometimes you might have a question whereby you are asked to differentiate between classical and operant conditioning. So in this case, you need to actually understand both of them. All these behavioral theories, you need to understand both the classical and the operant conditioning. And we move on to the fourth point there, which is the symptoms of physically, emotionally, and sexually abused children. Since I've set 3 exams, I've set the April-May exams, I've set the August examination, and of course we've got the November exams, which we sometimes refer to as the exam that you can, the alternative examination. Okay, so I will not be able to mention, because I will not even know right now which exams has the physical or the emotional or the sexual abused children as an equation for you to understand. But it's important that you understand all of these symptoms. For you as a teacher, as an educator, you have to be aware of an abused child sitting in front of you. Sometimes children are physically abused. A child might have been beaten at home, might be physically assaulted even at home or even in the school ground. So when a child is sitting in front of you and the child has got marks on their body, or they've got cuts or wounds, you should be able to understand that this child, he or she, is physically abused, and it's up to you to take it up with your school management. And then we have got the emotional abused children. Not all wounds are physical. Some of these wounds are emotional. So you have to understand what is normal in a child's behavior and what is not normal. And as a teacher, you have to look out for all these signs that this child is emotionally abused. And of course, sexually abused children, your study guides give you at least 9 points of things to look out for when children are sexually abused. This can be a girl child, it can be a boy child, all these things can happen. So you should be able to understand, and then you should be able to take these symptoms very serious, because it affects the learning and understanding happening in your classroom. Learning that will not take place when children are abused. So as a teacher, it's your responsibility. For those 5 hours that the child sits in your classroom, it's your responsibility to make sure that child is fine. Let me just take my water break. In as much as it's the responsibility of the parents to make sure that the children are not abused, it's also our responsibilities as teachers when we have these children in our classroom. When we shouldn't turn a blind eye when we have a child in your own classroom that might or is going through abuse, any form of abuse, whether, as I mentioned, whether it's physical abuse or emotional abuse or sexually abused children. And watch out for any of this abuse happening to your learners in the class, either from the learners in the same classroom or from the learners in other classes, because it's not allowed, and we will not have a situation whereby we are having children who are abused. And then we have got, how do we handle behavior problems? in your classroom. Sometimes in some schools, I know some teachers have got what is called school ground duties, whereby during break time, 2 or 3 or 4 teachers are supposed to supervise what is happening during break time. So this is when you are a lot of bullying might happen, a lot of fighting, and the use of abusive language, or that this abusive language, and it can also lead to emotional abuse. So you need to know, how do you handle behavioral problems? As we know, our government does not allow us to use corporal punishment. So what are you supposed to do in a situation where you're not allowed to use behavioral corporal punishment, but then you need to handle a behavioral problem in a learner? So we are encouraged that we should use alternative methods to corporal punishment. For example, when a child breaks something, maybe it's break time, the child deliberately breaks, or maybe, yeah. So you are supposed to actually let that child fix what they've broken without you having to apply corporal punishment. Okay, so that is an example of how we can handle this behavioral problems. Of course, we can, if the behavior is out of hand, we can bring the whole behavior to the attention of the parents, to the behavior of the parents, and to the behavior, not to the behavior, but to the attention of the parents, or to the attention of the school management, and to the life skill teacher in your school. Okay, that is handling behavioral problems. In some schools, of course, you do already have, you find that you have rules that should guide the behavior of children. Of course, at the beginning of each school year, like we are just beginning this school year now, parents are given the rules of the school, or the rules of each and every class, or the rules of each and every school. So it's important that each child understand what is expected of them and what punishment they will be given in an event that they display some behavioral problems. So it's very important for you as a teacher in training, that you do understand that you are supposed to handle behavior problems according to the prescribed rules given in each setting, like as we are giving them to you. It's very important that your study guide gives you examples, even gives you examples of how to handle behavioral problems. They also give you guidelines on what you should not do. For example, corporal punishment, as I mentioned earlier, that it's not allowed. I'm going to move on now to motivation. We also find the topic of motivation in Unit 2. When you are going through the module and to realize that the module might not have enough information on motivation, and maybe you want to understand more on what is the definition of motivation, on what is the definition of intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, you are allowed to use any books on motivation, especially that books that have to do with learning, motivation and learning, because we want you to understand motivation from a learning perspective, since you are someone who's been trained to be delivering learning. So we want you to understand what is meant by motivation, what is intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. One good book that talks a lot about motivation is a book of Mwamwenda, Educational Psychology of Mwamwenda, an African Perspective. You will find that Mwamwenda has written a lot on motivation. That is only if you want to read more on motivation, or if you believe that your study guide does not provide you with a lot of information. So what is motivation? So we are saying that motivation is a process that initiates, guides, and maintains goal-oriented behaviors. So it initiates, like we are saying, it can guide you, or it can maintain you to reach your goals. That is motivation. And when we talk of intrinsic, how different is intrinsic from extrinsic? In intrinsic motivation, we are saying this is motivation that comes within a person, not from outside. For example, when I say within, it means that this person is motivated or has got goals to achieve, not because of what they will receive from others, not because of what others will say. This person is motivated because they've got that need, a need within themselves that they want to achieve. I want to do this so that I can be able to achieve. I enjoy what I'm doing, and I'm doing it, and I'm going to continue doing it because I love what I do. That's someone who's intrinsic motivated. For example, you want to read a book because you enjoy reading that book and you want to understand more about what will happen in the book. So here you are having a person who's got intrinsic motivation. Because they love reading, they will continue reading that book. So at the end of the day, they might perform very well in that subject because they enjoy reading. For example, someone who enjoys history, they might read more and more on history and find out more about what has happened in this story because they've got that enjoyment, or they love reading about history. And then we have got someone who has extrinsic motivation. This is someone who is motivated, who is encouraged to do something, not because it's coming from inside, but because they are looking at the end result. What will I get at the end of this? Instead of saying, I want to read about history because I love history, the person is just looking at the fact that, no, I'm going to read because at the end of the day, I want to obtain an A in the subject history. That is an extrinsic motivated person. They look at the rewards, the outside reward. That I'm going to get an A, so I'm going to read. I'm going to finish reading this book and I'll read more again on this book, so that at the end of the day I get an A. That is an extrinsic motivated person. Sometimes extrinsic motivation does not only come from rewards. Sometimes it can come because someone is avoiding punishment. So the person will say, no, I'm going to read this history book because I do not want to fail, so that my parents will maybe remove some benefits from me. They will take away the phone that they gave me. They will take away the TV that they gave me and everything. So I'm avoiding punishment. So at the end of the day, I'm going to read so that I avoid being punished. That is an example also of extrinsic motivation. So someone who's intrinsic motivated might be studying, or might have a goal, or might be motivated to achieve a goal because they want to get a reward, want to get an A, or they might avoid punishment, avoid failing so that they don't get punished. That is extrinsic motivation. Of course, we know intrinsic comes from inside. What you feel, you are already inside, you already have this goal and you love what you are doing and you want to achieve more. That is intrinsic motivation. That is more or less what you can expect from Unit 2. Let me go on to Unit 3. Unit 3, as I mentioned earlier in the first slide, that this is the module that talks about illnesses. So if I look here, I think I've concentrated on 3 illnesses for the 2022 examination. I've looked at, so this one is quite clear. Even if I don't mention it, you can see it for yourself there on the slide, that the diseases that you must concentrate on are measles, polio, and TB. I would not just mention which will come on which paper, but I know that all these three exams they will have questions on the childhood illnesses given them. Before I go on talk about the causes, symptoms, and possible treatment or complications of these 3 diseases that I've mentioned there, I would like to highlight again why it is important for you who is a junior primary school teacher or a pre-primary school teacher. Why is it important for you to understand childhood diseases? Why should I understand childhood illnesses as a teacher? It's very important because you might sit in a class whereby a child is displaying symptoms of an illness. And we are not saying teachers should become doctors or nurses. No, we just wanted to have at least a basic understanding that this child who is displaying these symptoms, the child might be having TB, the child might be having diarrhea, the child might be having polio, or this could be an example of a child who might be having measles. And we know illnesses like measles are highly transmissible illnesses, so you need to identify this early on so that that child can be given the necessary attention, medical attention that they might need, and also to avoid other children from catching on the disease. Of course, so you have to understand, if I mention measles, you have to understand what are the causes of what might have caused a child to have measles, what are the symptoms as I mentioned, and what are the possible treatment. Even if a child has gone through treatment, what complications might they display or might they have after they were treated from measles or from polio. Because I think I also mentioned earlier also on that illnesses like polio, even when the child has received treatment, they might have lifelong complications. For example, we have seen people who are wheelchair bound because they had polio when they were infants, or when they were in their early years in life. So these are the possible complications that a child might have. And a child might also have TB, because the causes of TB can be many. It can be we don't, and we will not really explain right now what are the causes, but of course you can read on your own what are the causes of TB. But of course you need to know when a child is having TB, what symptoms should you look out for, of course, and what are the possible treatment. You can actually with the assistance of your life school teacher at school, or your guidance teacher, however you call it, whether it's a life school teacher or a guidance teacher, and your management at school, you can also start the process of this child going into treatment. If maybe the treatment, you see that the child has not been guided into a treatment of their illness from the home where they are coming from. And of course, like I said, it's very important for you to understand that even when a child has gone through treatment, the child is fine, they might still display some complications because of the childhood illness that they might have. You might, for example, be teaching a grade 4 class, whereby a child in that grade 4 class might have suffered from any of these illnesses in their early years, maybe when they were in pre-primary or when they were in grade 1 or grade 2, and they might still be showing some symptoms. For example, an illness like TB. TB is a very serious illness, and the child might still display some complications later on in life. So you need to understand what are these complications. Okay, so this is the Unit 3, which is about your illness, depending on what study guide you are using, but it should be from that Unit 3 study guide. Key areas in Unit 4. This is self-concept. I think I've jotted down some. Self-concept is about a person's overall view of himself or herself, which may include perception about trends, their abilities, their gender, or their ethnic affiliation. Who, in short, the child asks himself or herself, who am I in this world? What are my views as myself? What are my abilities? What are my trends? What are my perceptions? What is my gender? What is my ethnic affiliation? So this is now self-concept. And as teachers, we need to help to guide our learners to have positive self-concept. What are their abilities? We need to guide them to actually realize what their abilities are, and we need to put more emphasis on these children understanding and accepting their abilities. We are not supposed to concentrate on what they cannot do, but we concentrate on what they are able to do. This is what we mean by their abilities. If a child is good in art, you encourage that art ability in them. If a child is good in reading, for example, is a very good reader or is a fast reader, you encourage that ability. If a child is good with numbers, you identify that your grade 3 child in your class is very good in with numbers, and you encourage that ability in them, and you teach them to learn, to accept that, and to enhance that ability in them. And that is what we mean by developing self-concept in children, and why it's important to have a very good self-concept. And the next point there, which we also find in Unit 4, is the influence of personalities on self-concept and motives. Personalities, you have to understand each and every person has got a different personality, and your personality should be driven towards what is positive in your life. What is the self-concept which is correct? What are the motives that can motivate you? And then we'll look onto the role of physical appearance and the performance on self-concept. How a child appears physically and how it can influence their self-concept, whether it's as we already mentioned, that we are developing or we are moving towards a positive self-concept. So physical appearance is very important. The child should be able to feel happy about how they are looking physically, and you encourage them to look at their physical appearance, or to concentrate on their on a good physical appearance, because it will of course have an impact on how they carry themselves, and the kind of view that how they regard themselves, and of course it will influence them to have a positive self-concept. We do not encourage children to look down upon themselves, or to say negative things about themselves, or to to use language which is not developing good self-concept. Mature adult, it's a concept which is in your study guides. Read more on it. I will not touch more on that because if I mention it, I'll just be defining it for you. I want to go and find this definition and understand it and understand how you can apply it. How to discipline learners in your class. How do you discipline learners? You can discipline learners without hurting their feelings. You do not have to shout at learners to say that you have disciplined them. You do not have to demean them or to make them feel less important in discipline. You can actually direct and encourage them to do what is expected of them without criticizing them. You can encourage someone who has done something wrong, you can encourage them to do something better. You don't have to criticize them. You can discipline learners. Don't discipline learners. Whenever you are disciplining learners as a teacher, as a parent, some of you are lucky you are parents. Whenever you are disciplining a child, a learner in your class, please make sure that you have to ensure that your level or your way of disciplining does not actually hurt their feelings. You don't have to start discipline by using bad language for the child to be disciplined. The child can still be disciplined in a loving manner. So this is what you have to concentrate on. Or you can find several ways. Your study guides has got guidelines and it explains how you should be able to discipline and avoid using, like I'm just giving you an example, avoid using language that can hurt their feelings. That's the one way in which you can discipline learners. I'm moving on now because we are running out of time. Key areas in Unit 5. Perceptual development, its role in attention and learning, and how teachers could support perceptual learning difficulties. Go and read more on what is meant by perceptual development, what is its role, how can it be used in learning, how teachers can actually use it to support learning difficulties. Information processing from sensory input to long-term memory. Here, please understand what we mean by long-term memory, what's meant by short-term memory. Strategies for visual, auditory, and kinesthetic approach to learning. Some learners are good by learning through visual. There are learners that learn more when they actually can see what they are learning. These are the visual learners. They would actually they would actually remember a story more when they've seen pictures. You can tell a story to grade 1 learners by showing them pictures. For example, you can say Sarah went to the shop. You can show a picture of a shop and you can show Sarah walking into the shop. They will actually, visual learners will actually remember this more when they have seen the picture of Sarah in the shop, and they will tell that story more because they are visual. And then we've got learners that learn more by hearing. These are the learners that will learn better if they listen to a song or they listen to a story being told or you read it out to them. And then we've got the kinesthetic approach to learning. These are learners that learn better by doing. It involves hands. If you ask them you want them to learn about how to use a scissor, you actually ask them to cut out pictures using their hands, and then they can actually say, okay, I cut out the picture of Sarah and they cut out the picture of the shop, and then they'll remember the whole story because now they've done the whole picture themselves, and then this is how actually they learn more when they're actually involved in the whole thing using their hands. Please, you need also to understand what is meant by surface and deep learning. Surface learning is more of rote learning where you just memorize things, and deep learning involves your full understanding of concepts. You understand, you are able to explain it. It's not just memorizing like surface learning. Surface learning involves rote learning, it involves more memorizing, and deep learning involves you understanding the concept in full. The last point in Unit 5 that we must look on is the issue of language and motivation. Why should we put such emphasis on language? Why is language so important? So we are told that the language is important because it helps people to actually interact with each other. When you use language, you are able to interact with others. You are able to tell others how you are feeling. You are able to tell others what you are thinking. You are able to tell others what you need, and you are also able to ask other people questions. And that is only done through the use of language. And it can, because you are able to tell others what you are thinking, you are able to ask others what you want to ask them. It involves deep learning, because then you don't only memorize stuff, but you are able to ask questions and understand why a certain thing is the way it is, because you are able to use that language. That's why it's important to use language in deep learning. The last unit is about the overall issues of poverty, ill health in society, and how does this whole thing lead to the learning process in children in the school, in the education sector. We know in a country like our Namibia, we are a developing country, and the issues of poverty we are within our communities. Whether we turn a blind eye or it or not, as a teacher, you might experience that you find learners that will come from extremely poverty household or poor households, and then of course there might be those who are better than other learners. So you have to understand that sometimes the impact of poverty can hamper learning. It can delay learning. It has an impact on learning. A child who lives home who has not eaten might not perform as well as a child who comes from a home where they've eaten breakfast. It can affect, by the time it's 10, 11 o'clock in your classroom, a child who has not eaten anything and a child who has eaten, they might not perform the same way. They might not be learning in the same rate or in the same way. And the child who is hungry, who comes from a house where they don't eat a 3-course meal, they don't eat healthy food, they don't have access to nutritious food like fruits and vegetables and enough rest and all that, due to poverty, they might also experience more ill health in not only in society where they come from, but you might also see this in your own classroom. So it's important to understand how this can actually impact the whole learning process in your school. That's when it's very important for some schools to actually provide feeding programs for children who are coming from homes that are experiencing extreme poverty. And then we've got violence in societies. We live in societies whereby children are sometimes, unfortunately, they are exposed to violence. So you should make time for children to understand and talk to them and understand and let them know how they should start from themselves, how they should treat others, how they should not disregard women or children in society. It starts with you in the classroom with the learners. The impact on the physical development and the health of learners, this I've already mentioned the first point, but it's important for you to understand this impact that poverty has on not only on their physical development, but also on their health and the whole learning process which is taking place in your classroom and beyond your classroom. I think I've come to the end of what is expected in the 2022 academic year. I wish you all the best, and I am looking forward to mark your exams. And if you have any questions like I've mentioned, please feel free to contact me. Please do contact me between 6 and 7 in the evenings. I do not work with my phone. My environment does not allow me to work with my phone. So even if you do call me during working hours, you will not get hold of me. So you are advised to call me between 1800 hours to 1900 hours. That is between 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. every day, including weekends. So thank you and all the best again. The end of our presentation.